Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another live from steamy hot London. It's currently 30 degrees Celsius outside, which I guess is about 88, 89 degrees Fahrenheit, and getting warmer over the next couple of days. I hope you're having a good weekend. We've had a great weekend so far. Hosted my patron captains last night on a Zoom call, and then today been out for a 15-mile, what's that, 25 kilometers if you're in that money cycle. What we do on the weekend, particularly in the summer, is we'll head off to a part of London we don't know. So this is kind of, we headed right up to the north, on the Piccadilly line right to the north, and hire those Line bikes, which I know some people drive them crazy. I love those e-bikes, and then cycle around there and all the way back home. So that was pretty good. Anyway, so now it's probably hot and sweaty. So hopefully it's more pleasant where you are, although I actually love the hot weather. Anyway, enough of all that. Let's get into the live stream. So as usual, if you're here, thanks very much for joining me on the live, answering as many questions as I possibly can within 60 minutes. If you do have a question, please write the word question in front. People who are regularly here can already see you doing questions with a question. If you're watching this afterwards, which I know many people do, remember this is a live stream. Everything on here is driven by what people ask. And if you want to skip through, if you scroll through, you'll see the questions coming up as they come up along the way. So lots of regulars here, and I will get into the questions quite soon because I want to try and get through as many as possible. But my video this week, which came out last night, is around underrated tips that I thought I'd put to the test when I went on my Sky Princess group cruise that Paul and Carol did. And lots of discussion about the tips, but actually one thing has caused a huge discussion in the group. So I talk a little bit about how I did something heading on to that where I didn't really follow an underused tip that nearly caused me huge problems. And then I get lots of other tips. But actually the thing that people have really got uptight about is this. So I have a picture of eating the very delicious princess pizzas. I'm not a big massive pizza fan, but I really do like the ones in Alfredo. And I'm eating it with a knife and fork. And that's drove people completely crazy. It's really divided people. Now, the Italians who I guess created pizza, also made pizza mainstream, they will eat pizza with knife and fork. I've always eaten pizza with knife and fork. I guess maybe it's a more North American thing where people eat it more, pick it up with hands. Although I did actually watch, as a great etiquette guy who posts lots of videos on Instagram Reels, TikTok and stuff. And I did notice he does talk about how you cut it and it's acceptable etiquette apparently to then pick it up and fold it. Anyway, that's just a complete aside, but I just thought it was kind of interesting how sometimes the unexpected really cause the biggest controversies of all. So what I'll do is I'll start jumping into the questions. I'll go through them more or less in order if I see any themes and do shout outs for people obviously as we see them. So Warren is a regular here, which is great. I guess that's Queen Mary 2, transatlantic Queen's Grill really worth the cost? So I guess I'm assuming you're asking about the Queen's Grill part. So in reality, Warren, a lot of it in reality depends on what's important to you. If you literally sat down and did a calculation which said, what are the extra perks I get? Obviously you get a much bigger cabin. Even if you started a Q6, it's probably about double the size of a balcony cabin. So you get more space. You're going to get 2 free bottles of liter booze. You're going to get canapes. You're going to get a butler. You're going to eat in Queen's Grill restaurant, which has an elevated menu. You can order off menu. If you actually tot those things up, priority embarkation, disembarkation, you're not going to say, well, actually, in terms of value, it's not more. So it's really what's important to you. So if, for me, one of the things with the transatlantic is, the dressing up and the dining experience is a big part of a transatlantic. And so the Queen's Grill dining is quite a lot elevated. So it's open seated dining. Now you can go Britannia and you can get anytime dining, or you can get Britannia Club, which is anytime dining. But in Queen's Grill, it's anytime dining over breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And you can order anything off menu. So there's a list of suggested things off menu, Chateaubriand, beef Wellington, Dover sole, that kind of stuff. But you can literally order anything you want off menu. Caviar, you get it's included. So a lot of it hinges around that experience, but in reality, it's around that dining experience. You do get another lounge, which is not particularly great lounge, especially. You get afternoon tea served there rather than in the Queen's room, so it's less of a bun fight. Probably bad pun there. So a lot of it hinges around. Personally, I think it's an incredible experience to go because you do spend more time in your cabin. Having a bigger cabin is very nice. So, for example, we have actually booked a transatlantic for next June, heading from Southampton to New York, partly because I've got a cruise heading out of New York. Mark's going to come with me on the transatlantic, and we have gone Queen's Grill just because it does elevate that experience. So a lot of it hinges around what is important to you. Now, John, you have a question which I can't really answer. So if anyone has a better perspective, I suspect you're going to have to dive elsewhere. So John is asking, what are the alcoholic drinks on Oceania if you don't purchase the drinks package? We've heard they've changed a bit from previous seasons. So one of the biggest changes is they kept changing the program from O-Life, et cetera, and I think is it called, I can't even remember what it's called now. I was looking at it yesterday. So one of the things you used to have beer and wine included with lunch and dinner. That's no longer included. So you only get your soft drinks and stuff like that. So if you do want alcoholic drinks, wines, etc., you will need to get either by them ad hoc or buy the drinks package. Now, in terms of the specifics on that, I don't really know. I was last on Oceania last year on Vista, and I'm not sure I've still got copies of, I always take pictures of the drinks, etc. So one of the things, so I can't help you very much other than the rules of the things have changed. One of the things I find quite helpful, John, is if you go into an Oceania Facebook group or you go into Cruise Critic, into the Oceania group and ask people to post who currently on or have been on, post copies of the drinks menu, you'll find someone will do that. And that's probably one of the best ways of getting the most recent kind of list if you're very interested in the specific brands or that sort of stuff. Christine is here, which is great. Chris is here, which is good. Hetty, of course, back from a big mega trip, is back. So it's good to see you here. Chris always has great questions. Are there any cruises that combine Japan and China? Yes. In fact, I was on recently. The reason I actually chose the Crystal Symphony trip is partly because I wanted to try Crystal, but also they did include Japan and China. So although admittedly we didn't have many stops in Japan, so it started in Tokyo, but you know, if you did sort of the cruise slightly before that, you would have got a more intensive Japan. It then moved on to China, to Shanghai. Most cruises only really go to Shanghai, generally speaking, but there are a couple that do that. But I can see probably why you're asking this question. Certainly coming out of the pandemic, China were very slow to open up to cruising and cruise ships, certainly international ones. So when cruises clients were planning, they seem to have shifted much more, I notice, into itineraries that included Vietnam, more Thailand, less on Japan, and on China. So do have a look at those. Now, a couple of years ago, which don't really do now that they've moved the Queen Elizabeth, I did a Queen Elizabeth, which included Hong Kong, China, Taiwan, and Japan, which is a fantastic combination. I've been looking for a similar cruise to that. I haven't found one, but certainly take a look at Crystal and also take a look at some of the end of cruise, beginning of cruise. So take a look at Oceania, take a look at Seabourn as well, for example. But it is China is fantastic. I'm a big fan of Shanghai. I used to go there a lot in my corporate days, and I've been there 3 times on a cruise now. One of the things I would say is if you do go to China, try and go on a small ship. Now, the first 2 times I went there on Queen Elizabeth and Queen Mary II, and because it's a big ship, you docked very far out. When I went on Crystal, you dock right within the city near the Bund, and that is just fantastic. The sailing is incredible. So if you actually watch my Crystal trips, I've got some stuff on the sailing. And of course, one of the things to do, again, is talk to a travel agent. I think you're UK based. It's sort of like a Sarah Bolton, travel agent Sarah, for example. She will also be able to dig many of those out. The other thing that I do, Chris, one of the ways I also check is I go to Vacations to Go and I'll put in Shanghai, for example, as a port and see what cruise lines are coming up. That's another way of often checking those as another way around. Seinwald Marchen, good to see you. Always ask lots of questions. Last week you mentioned a South Pacific island hopping cruise. How do you pick your itinerary? Is Pork again a good choice? Planning French Polynesia on Aran instead. So South Pacific, the French Polynesian Islands is fantastic. The ones that I would strongly recommend you look at is Port Gauguin, which is very costly, but it's just a magnificent experience. They've just revamped the ship. I mean, when we went on before it's revamped, we went on again after revamp, and then on the big revamp. I mean, it's an old ship, but it's very beautiful, amazing crew, really good connections. Windstar is also, they've been in the region for a very long time. They use, I think it's like Starbreeze. They used to use some of the more sailing ships. They now use more of the old seaborne ships, the stretched seaborne ships. They know it incredibly well. They have some very nice itineraries. Port Gauguin do have some longer itineraries, which include, the closer and the further out islands, Marshall Islands, I think it is. Aranui, I would love to do Aranui, which is the half cruise ship, half freighter ship, because they give to some of the even more remote islands. I haven't been on Aranui. I've seen it up close because it was docked next to us. They are introducing another ship, which I think is cruise focus in a couple of years' time. So I would focus on those. If you're doing kind of a Papeete to Papeete, if you're doing like we're doing in December, we're going from Sydney across to some of those other islands between Sydney and then doing French Polynesia, we're doing on Oceania. But you'll find there's a couple of lines will do that. Oceania does that. Seabourn does that. Some of the bigger ships go, but they're more limited on what islands they go to. So once you get into things like Honolulu America, some of the Royal Caribbean ships, they can only go to very few of the islands. Like Bora Bora has quite strict rules, for example. So try and stick on the smaller on the smaller ships. So we're going on Riviera, which is 1,200. That just hits the criteria for getting into Bora Bora. So I tend to focus on lines that have been very close and there for a long time. So if you're doing that region, Port Gauguin, Windstar, Aranui are definitely the ones to look at. Kelly is here, Buzz. Jeff is here. Good to see you. So you're obviously right. So Jeff was on the captain's Zoom call last night. He was still, I guess, crossing, and it sounds like you're now in New Jersey. So good to have seen you, and thanks for popping in. Tom, I'm observing limitation with my current travel agent building a 2026 Tahiti vacation. Do you have recommendations for US travel agents? Tom, absolutely yes. So there's 2 travel agents that I recommend in the US. I actually have them in an article, which I will list at the bottom. I'll just make a note of that. So what I will do when this ends, I will put a copy to an article that I have on the blog, or you can just go to my blog, tourstravelers.com, and just search travel agents. But I have 2 travel agents in the US that I strongly recommend. One is called Gary Pluck from Red Travel, and the other is Walter from Where's Walter Travel. Both are excellent. I have very good feedback. Kind of 98% of the people who've worked with both of them have given me very good reviews of them. So those are the 2. They both are big cruisers. They know the industry really well. So I will leave a link to that, which has those in there, and definitely I strongly recommend them. So it's even more muggy in Glasgow as well. So let's have a look. Sylvia, oops. How do you find what special nights each cruise has, such as white hot nights on Norwegian Cruise Line? So Sylvia, for me, there's probably 2 ways that I do it. One of which is you'll find many cruise lines will announce those on your cruise planners, or not list them, if that's the right word, on your cruise planner. So if you log into your account, your booking on Norwegian, in the itinerary section, often where by day you'll be able to choose, then add excursions or spas or often special dining kind of things. They will normally list the dress code for that evening there. So that's the way that I normally would do it, because it will also, you'll then know which night it is and what they've got. The second thing is just looking at what cruise lines always do. So some cruises, Azamara and Crystal and they will have a white night. Honolulu American always have an orange night. Some of them will just have them as standard. So it's sometimes just looking on the website, what is their standard night? Cunard, for example, although they stopped having them for a while, but they normally have a Roaring 20s, a masked ball, and a black and white night, and then normally have one or all of those. But again, you can go onto the cruise itinerary on your booking, and it will normally tell you. So that's how I would normally do it. If anyone has a better perspective, then shout. So hi, Kev, from Very Hot Bavaria. I think also, I guess what's happening, reading a lot of this, like a big dome of heat over Europe, which is spilling into the UK. I think we're heading up to 32 degrees. I don't know, that's heading towards 100 or something on Tuesday, and then the rain comes. So it's very hot and sticky. So do take care, everybody. So let's have a look. I think I missed, just a reminder, write the word question so I don't miss your question. So let's have a look. No, I don't think I've missed any. Caroline, I think this is a question. Let's have a look. Would like a small ship going to the Med or Caribbean, small ship from Southampton. Okay, so Caroline, one of the challenges is, if you're looking to go small ships out of Southampton, it's a little bit more limited. So you'll normally have, based in Southampton, you've obviously got Cunard have ships sailing out there all the time. P&O do. Princess will have a ship. They're doing ships plural, Celebrity, MSC, but they all tend to be on the little larger side. So the smaller ships that are constantly sailing out of there, you're probably talking about the Queen Victoria, Queen Elizabeth, which is about a 2,000 kind of passenger. But I'm guessing you're talking much smaller than 700 or so, 2,000, 1,200. Now, what you will find is that you do have ships coming in and out of there. They're not home based there, so it's much more limited. So Viking, for example, will come in. They actually will often come in. They're actually into London. They'll sail up the Thames and dock at Greenwich. You'll have sometimes Oceania will go from there. Seabourn might drop in, but it's much less kind of ships based there all the time. And they tend mostly, though, Caroline, to head and do kind of round UK trips or head up to Norway, Iceland, countries, heading less to the Med and less to the Caribbean. So that's going to be more of a challenge from that perspective, finding a smaller ship. Now, Fred Olsen is based. They have much smaller ships. They sail quite often from Southampton and many other ports. Saga do have smaller ships, and they do head off to the Mediterranean. They do head off to the Caribbean, but they are, of course, 50 plus. They do sail at Dover, though, mostly, rather than Southampton. But they will have, because they sell all their sailings out of the UK. So everything they do is out of the UK. So if they go to New York and Canada, it will be out of the UK, normally Dover. If they go to the Mediterranean, the same, the Caribbean, etc., etc. So I don't know what your age profile is of Saga Appeals, but that is another one. The other thing, Caroline, I would say is, I'm guessing your UK base is to also speak to travel agent Sarah Bolton, who's actually in that article I spoke about. She'll also be able to help. And the other thing which I do, which I mentioned a little bit earlier to somebody else, is when I'm looking for permutations and options. So my chair's very squeaky today. I realize I'm leaning it probably makes it sound like I'm doing something other than squeaking around. But anyway, Caroline, the other thing I do is I go to vacations2go.com. I don't book through Vacations to Go, but I find it's an incredibly good site to find things. So I would go into Vacations to Go, for example, and I would put a departure port of Southampton, but I would put in then Mediterranean, or I put in Caribbean and the rough date that you want. And it will bring up all the ships sailing out of Southampton as an embarkation port. And you can then spot if there's any smaller ships there. Obviously, it's a little bit more intensive way of doing it. But that's what I do. I do that quite a lot. The same as I mentioned earlier when I was looking at cruises going into Shanghai around the time. That's what I did as a way of kind of playing around, looking at the different options. Bobby's here from Chicago land. George, thank you so much for the advice. Previously, I booked my elderly mother on the full route cruise on Queen Anne. So I think, George, if I remember correctly, you were the person who was asking me about options. If it's not, so I apologize for that. Someone else was asking that. So there's going to be someone else on that world cruise. Fantastic. That's a very nice itinerary, and hopefully she has a great time. Just a reminder, do write the word question so I don't miss your question. Liliam, I'll be on Sky Princess for Southampton 2 weeks, Scandinavian cruise, any trips. So that's actually a very similar cruise then to the one that I did in May, which was the Scandinavian cruise. So I do, my video actually on Princess is coming out, linked to Sky Princess, is actually coming out next weekend. Patrons and channel members have got that ad-free early release version of that. Although I tend to dive a little bit more into Princess overall, but that will touch on some of it. So next weekend is in time for your cruise. But Lilian, the thing I would say, just some quick tips, is pre-book and pre-book as much as you can. So a lot of the stuff on that was sold out. So if you've got special dining, if you've got, for example, Princess Premier, and you have unlimited special dining, get in there and try and lock down bookings now. So some people who got Princess Premier who were on that trip didn't get any specialty booking even though they have the perk. So if you're looking at special dining, lock in, get in really quickly. Also with excursions, do the same thing, because a lot of the popular excursions do sell out quite quickly if you're planning to do kind of excursions. So try and pre-book as much as you possibly can would be my key tip. The other thing, which is very important, is download the app, because the app is kind of quite important. If you've got, I don't know what dining you've booked, but if you've got, for example, the anytime dining option, and you want to eat in the one where you do bookings, you do your bookings on the app there, so you can actually tie those bookings up. So if you've got the, I can't remember the Estrella, I know Soleil is the fixed dining, because they've got the 3 dining rooms on there, and one of them, which is anytime dining, you just walk in there and anything goes. There's another one where you book. So you can go on the app, so you can do it each day, or you can actually book it in advance. So kind of lock those kind of things down if you can. But make sure you've got the app downloaded, because things, if you want to do things like book excursions, it's much easier through there. Connecting to the Wi-Fi is much easier through there. Booking stuff is just so much easier there. They've also got like a more of a live chat function there, which can save you from going to guest services, for example, which is pretty handy. Let's have a look. Debbie, I would like to know if you could recommend a good website for booking tours for an Asian cruise. I find the tours extremely expensive with the cruise line. Yes, you're right. Tours in Asia can be incredibly expensive. So, Debbie, I do have a couple of options, and again, I will leave some links in this. So maybe like 5 minutes, 10 minutes after this end, come back and have a look in the notes for this. So, Debbie, the 3 that I would suggest you focus on are Viator, who do have a lot of tours. They are not necessarily directly linked to cruises as such, but you'll be able to go through, look at the port, look at the date, but they have a lot of good tours. The 2 which I find actually even easier to use is the one which is called shoreexcursionsgroup.com and ventureashore.com. Now, what's great about those 2 is you'll be able to go in there, Debbie, and you'll be able to put in your cruise line. So say you're going, I don't know, Holland America, let's say. You're going to Holland America and you're going on Amsterdam, which I know is not going to Asia, so it won't be Amsterdam. But say you put in Amsterdam, and then you look at for the date of your trip. Then what it does is it'll bring up the same as you do on the cruise line site. It'll bring up for each of the ports what excursions they are offering, and then the price. Now, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, they will be a lower price and smaller groups, and they'll have tours that don't necessarily happen. They also have guaranteed to get you back to the port, because they work very closely. They're used to, they just focus on cruise line excursions. So they really have that under control, getting you back. And they also guarantee that for any reason they don't get you back, they will sort out getting you to catch up the ship. So that's a guarantee that is quite important. Now, the reason I'll leave links is I do have affiliate links, which of course you don't have to use. But if you use Shore Excursions Group, if you go on there and have a look, and there are tours that you like, when you check out, if you use the code TFT5, you will get 5% off those tours. If none appeal, on Venture Shore, I don't think I did have a discount code at one time. I don't think that exists anymore, but I will double check and see if I've still got a discount code. But I will leave those links anyway in there. But so Viator.com, shoreexcursionsgroup.com, and ventureashore.com. Those are the ones that I use, and I tend to focus. And lots of people are much bigger fans of Viator. I tend to focus on those other 2. Let's have a look. Just remember to write the word question, because I do want to make sure that I don't miss any of your questions. Vince is asking the $64,000 question, or whatever the big prize money question is these days. The best luxury line for solo travelers. So if we're talking luxury, I guess I'm going to talk luxury and ultra luxury. So luxury is your Viking, Oceania, Azamara, Windstar. Ultra luxury, of course, Explorer Journeys see themselves in there. I see them more luxury, but you've got Explorer Journeys, Crystal, Silversea, Seabourn. Probably one of the best at the moment, or 2 of the best at the moment, is Crystal, because they do have solo cabins, quite a lot of solo cabins, and they run a lot of solo passenger deals. So for example, I went on Crystal Symphony. I actually got one which was a cabin upgrade. I didn't do a solo deal on that one, but I've got another transatlantic which I've booked for them towards the end of next year, and they had a fantastic solo deal. So if you look on their website, they run solo deal quite a lot on selected cruises. So, even though they're an ultra-luxury line, you can actually get some incredibly good pricing. I mean, my transatlantic is like cheaper than, just going on a balcony cabin on Celebrity that I'm doing, a couple of months before that. But that's kind of then, a 5-star experience in a big cabin. But I actually haven't gone in a solo cabin. They do have a solo cabin. So I would look at Crystal. The other one is Explorer Journeys, because they're quite new. They have a lot of solo travel deals as well. And they normally guarantee that their solo supplement won't be any more than 50%. But again, they do have deals. Now, if you also go on to Silversea, they used to be pretty good at having solo deals. They have a little tab there where they have selected cruises. Seabourn, the same, not as many, but I've done a couple of solos on there. So those are probably the best ones to focus on, I would say. So let's have a look. Bobby asking the question, I want to do a British Isles cruise. What cruise line would give me a proper British experience, including the food? Thank you for your insights. So Bobby, I don't know if you're UK based or not UK based, but in terms of the most British experiences, you've got Cunard, obviously, which will have a very British experience, both in terms of the spelling, the language on the ship, if you like. The comedians or the acts will be very British focused. The food will be a British slant because they do have a lot of British passengers, for example. So very British. P&O obviously is the biggest British line. It's more mainstream, it's more value, but they do have some adult-only ships, which is Arcadia and Aurora. I mean, they're relatively old ships, but they have a very British experience. Then you've got Fred Olsen, although it's actually Norwegian-owned, they have a very British experience. Then you've also got a new line, which is a value line called Ambassador, which does, it's incredibly good value, and it has very British food. It's probably not as good food, some would argue, as some of those other lines, but it's good, solid British food, very good entertainment. You've got Saga as well. You don't look like you probably fall into the category, which is for 50 plus. It does tend to have a much older profile. But those are the ones that I would focus on now. Not all of them run British Isles cruises all the time, but many of them do. So I know Fred Olsen do, Cunard have a couple, Ambassador do a couple of those as well. So those would be the ones that I focus on, because once you get into others like Princess during the season run kind of pretty much back-to-back cruises, but that obviously is a much more, they will skew it a little bit more Brit, but it will still be a more American take. The same with Princess and those other lines. They will do Brit cruise. They'll sort of tailor because they'll get lots of Brits on, but it won't be as much. So the guest artists, for example, they'll tend to source from the UK. But those are the ones, Bobby, that I would focus on. Dave James Tate. I go on my first cruise in 38 years. Wow. On the 9th of July on P&I, I own it to the Norwegian Fjords. Any advice? One tip, please. So I would say, I don't know if you're going with your kids, maybe like it's school holidays. I'm guessing there's your kids. Let's just, if you're going with your kids, etc. One of the things I would do is I don't know if your kids are kids club people, but you might have seen the P&O introducing charges to pre-book your kids into kids clubs. Certainly kids clubs can get incredibly full. So they're now charging, if you make bookings for kids clubs on certain days, different prices for days and evenings in advance. Once you're on the ship, because subject to availability, you're not charged. But if you're going and you want your kids in the kids clubs, it's probably worth checking. Now, I don't know if it's across all the ships. I think they're testing it on some ships, but I think Iona's in that. So that would be my kind of hot tip, because they've only just introduced that in the last week or so. You might have got notification of that. The second thing that I would do is, it's heading into quite a very busy time. So a little bit like I said a little bit earlier, is try and pre-book stuff. Particularly excursions. Excursions in Norway are incredibly expensive. So if you are wanting to do any of those, look at those and lock those in. If you find they are a little bit too rich on pricing, the good thing about many of those ports, certainly that Iona will go to because it's a bigger ship, is most of those ports do have very good hop-on, hop-off buses, which will come to the port. So you can often pre-book tickets on the ship, but you can just buy them just as easily and often a little bit cheaper once you get out. But that's another good option. But again, it's a little bit, we're heading to busy times, school holidays, the ship will be very full. Pre-book as much as you can, like if you want to do dining and stuff. So I know you asked for one tip, but that was a couple of those. Bobby saying he's been watching my videos all day. Thank you very much. Booked a great, as well. That's a fantastic price, $4,000 for a 10-night cruise. Chris saying you can eat pizza anywhere you want. That's probably true. Michael asked me the question, which is, have you been on a cruise that lost power? I recently watched a documentary about Carnival Triumph. So I guess I just went live this week on Netflix. What do they call it? They're calling it the Poop Cruise. I can't remember. There's something, the Poop Cruise, about Carnival Triumph. So I have been, interestingly, I was on a ship, but it only lost power very briefly when I was on Sky. We were on Sky, I was on some, because I did Sky Princess, and a few weeks ago I did Sun Princess. I can't remember if it was on Sky Princess or Sun Princess now, where we did lose power very briefly, but it wasn't for very long. It was because they were switching. It must be on Sun Princess because it's a newer ship. They were switching on to shoreside power. So it's an energy ship, but they plug into shoreside power in port, which of course is a big trend that's happening to reduce emissions in port. And we had a couple of series of losing total power in the ship, like everything went out. I guess emergency lighting came on. So I've never been at sea for an extended period or anything where a cruise has lost power, and hopefully that will not happen. Now I know what I don't think I haven't watched the full documentary yet, but what I know because I've seen some press releases and some discussion is Carnival and I guess I don't know if Clear have put out a thing saying that since that they discovered there was a few design issues which have now been corrected in ships, the same as when there was that awful incident with Viking Sky, where it sort of lost power and was sort of tossing and turning in the rough seas, and they actually helicoptered people off. They discovered there was an issue with oil levels when the ship was moving a lot, and they've corrected that. So hopefully that will not happen. Scruffio, would you consider any other line than Cunard for transatlantic cruise? So yes, in fact, I've got a couple of booked. But Scruffy, what I would say is it's quite important probably to distinguish between a transatlantic crossing and a transatlantic cruise. And there is an important difference between those. So Cunard does a traditional crossing. So crossing is, first of all, it's on a liner. So the ship is specifically designed. It heads much more in the North Atlantic. So it's much rougher, choppier seas. And it basically does a service backwards and forwards. It does some other things out of season, but it's really almost like a commuter kind of thing. It's going holding back. And the ship is designed for the transatlantic, so that it's a massive big ship. It doesn't have that many passengers, so the space per passenger is enormous. Things like some of the public rooms are much more in the center of the ship, so from a movement perspective, it's less. So even the Britannia restaurants, the restaurants are more at the back, it's more in the center. The Queen's Room's more in the center, stuff like that. So it's a very specific ship, and they have a very intensive program designed for crossings as such. Then you have, I guess, a transatlantic cruise, which tend to be like probably 99, maybe make up the number, but I'm almost 100% of them. Let's go crazy. Almost 100% of them are in reality repositioning cruises, which happen to cross the Atlantic, and they tend to go sort of from Europe. So let me do the run because up here down to the Caribbean down here. Sorry, because this does the reverse. So they're not going across the North Atlantic, particularly. They're heading further down south, and then they're going, of course, from the Caribbean up to Europe. And so they're really moving cruise ships from one region to the other region at the beginning and end of the season. So I actually have done those before, and I have two booked for next year. One on Explore Journeys, which is going from Miami to Barcelona. And the other, which I mentioned earlier, is on Crystal, which is going from, I think it's from Lisbon, if I remember correctly, to Miami as well. Or was it Fort Lauderdale? So I will do those. Now, I know on those cruises, they will have much less intensive programming. So Cunard Queen Mary 2 is completely around, they have a jam-packed itinerary. So it's a very different experience. Those other transatlantic crossings, obviously they put on a bigger program, but it's a little bit more relaxation. They also stop at more places. So they'll stop at maybe Madeira, we're stopping at Cape Verde Island and stuff like that along the way, whereas the Queen Mary 2 will just go boom, boom, if you know what I mean. So if that makes sense, but yes is the answer. The reason I also, by the way, that I like those other transatlantics, the repositionings are incredibly good value. So they're normally way cheaper. So you can often go much better lines or better cabins. So for example, I really want to try Silversea Nova, the new class of ships. And I booked a reposition out. It's not a transatlantic, it's a trans-Pacific. So it goes from Alaska to Japan, but it's cost me less than half what it would normally cost per day to go on Silversea. So it's really good value. So I'm going on a 3-week trip that if I was paying normally, I would be like, maybe get like a 10-day trip for. So phenomenally good value. Whereas the Queen Mary 2 is not good value. It's the same price. So if you're going, you're not going to, it's not cheaper if you like. So hopefully that made sense, Grafio. Thanks for that questions. Kelly, let's see if I understand this question. Do you find much of a difference between Viking river cruises and other river cruise lines? Okay, so I thought you asked me to do a comparison of ocean because I just thought that. So Kelly, not massively in reality. If you look at, so there are differences because like with ocean cruising, you've got different grades. So the amount of inclusions, the quality of the service, kind of the bells, the whistles, the quality of the food, the furnishings, the plushness will differ. So you've kind of got at the very top, you've got the new Riverside, which are the old crystal ships, and Uni World in there. Probably Amma is sort of in there, a little bit there, but they are a little bit more premium. They are kind of the ultra luxury. Then you've got the sort of luxury kind of area, which is your Viking is in there, probably Avalon, which I'm going on actually in July. And you've got Scenic probably in the top category. Emerald's sort of in this more Viking category. So they do differ, but in reality, the ships are all pretty much, they have to be the same length, the same height. So you still get your semi-underwater cabins, your balcony cabins, and so on. So the cabins and stuff tend to be similar. They have, they all only have more limited dining. So the differences are a little bit more subtle. What Viking, of course, have is, because they have a very big fleet, they have a lot more choice of, destinations, rivers, timings, that kind of stuff. Than other lines, just because they have so many more. They obviously have a much more Scanda feel to them. They will have some inclusions that others don't. So they have beer and wine at dinner and the evening. Depending on where you've booked, you get gratuities included. So there are those kind of differences, but not massive difference. I think within a category. So to me, Viking, Avalon, Emerald are kind of similar. Viking is probably a little bit more traditional. So they don't have, for example, a fitness center in, they don't have, I don't think they have the massage spa, if I remember correctly. Don't quote me on that one. Whereas, say Avalon, they have a little fitness center. It's tiny, but they have a fitness person on board. They have slightly more, they talk about having more active excursions, that kind of stuff, but not a massive difference. A lot of it comes down to kind of personal preferences. Kathy is here, which is great to see you, Kathy. I hope you're on the mend. And because you've got your Rocky Mountain Alaska cruise coming up. So hopefully you are feeling way better and way on the mend. Caroline, I've asked that question. Kathy, following question. Doing the Rocky Mountain in Alaska mid-September, what clothes should I pack for Alaska, going with Hal? So, Kathy, the critical thing, obviously for Alaska, I can't remember if you've been to Alaska before, but I'm going to assume that you haven't been to Alaska. I can't remember. So layers is key. So obviously in September, the weather's starting to change a little bit. So you can be a little bit chilly. And if you're also doing excursions, if you're really splashing out and doing, those helicopters up to glaciers, it's cold. So, the key thing is layers. Not quite if you're doing an Antarctica, but so in one of my videos, I do have a thing where I talk about the layers, but it's really about just layering up. And for me, like woolly hats are kind of important. Gloves I do find kind of important, particularly. But what you can still happen at that time is that you could go in the morning in layers, and then you're kind of taking off your kind of coat and your jumper or whatever, or sweatshirt, and so a little rucksack that you take out with you, so clothes, stuff you can kind of ram in. So that's more for the Alaska part. In terms of Holland America, Holland America is pretty relaxed dress code. So they do have you know, the same as Celebrity, Princess, etc. They do have those sort of dressy night kind of equivalent. But in reality, what I've found is generally in Alaska is people are very casual. So they will not really still allow people to go in shorts, which certainly on Princess they allow people to go in shorts to dinner, even on the formal nights. They don't allow people in shorts. They prefer you not to wear jeans, but you'll find on Alaska, people will. It's much more casual because people are choosing cruise lines based on going to Alaska, less they want the Holland America experience. I would also pack, if you were here earlier, I would pack for Orange Night. They will have Orange Night, so that's always kind of fun. But you don't have to worry about dressing up particularly. I mean, of course you can, some people will, but it's definitely way more casual than if you're going to Holland America in any other part of the world, for sure. Andrew and Diana here of Calling All Ports. Good to see you here. Let's have a look. Bill. I'm looking at special offer cruise sites like Viking. They have a short deadline and it's hard to find the promised pricing. Would a travel agent help here? So, I mean, I'm not sure. I haven't looked. I need to look at the Viking ones. But you're right. What's happening a lot? I'm seeing a lot of this happening at the moment. Is cruise lines running these very short flash sales, so 48-hour sales, or they'll do a July 4th sale. I've seen those happening. You know, for this weekend, they're doing a July the 4th sale. MSC, you've got one. So you'll find a lot of them in and out. Celebrity are running some the weekend where 70% off the second person and all that sort of stuff. So they're right. They are quite short and time specific. Just as a little side, the way I keep on top of that is all the cruise lines. Because of what I do, I sign up to every cruise line. But any cruise line you like, sign up to the email newsletters. But even better is, even if you're not active on social media, follow them on Facebook, follow them on Instagram. I see a lot of those offers popping up there. Normally on those promotions, it'll normally lead you through. The thing to watch, which I think may be an issue with Viking, is often they're linked to limited amounts of cruises. But you're absolutely right. What I would often do, Bill, is I would, in my case, it's travel agent Sarah. If I see a deal that I want to jump on, so for example, when Celebrity were doing that 70% of a second person, there's a cruise that I knew I wanted to do, which was from New York via Canada, Greenland to Reykjavik. And when soon they came, I just sent a message to Sarah. I could see they're doing that promotion. Get me on that. So she then did all that stuff. Also importantly, though, Bill, the advantage is there was a promotion for a region, in fact, for my next Regent cruise, which is West Africa. Because actually I was looking back at the emails on that, and they were running a promotion that I spotted of, which was for you'd book a cabin and get a better cabin. So I could book like a basic cabin, but I could get a concierge cabin, which has some nice perks because you get a night in the hotel and a few other kind of other bits and pieces. So it was kind of a nice grade up. But so I saw that promotion. I asked her to get me a quote and stuff. And what happened is she was saying, well, the promotions kind of ended on that. Ended because it was over weekend, but they were closed over the weekend, her booking contact. So she was then able to on the Monday morning get hold of them first thing and say, look, my client wants this thing, asked me, you weren't open to book it on the Saturday and Sunday, so will you hold that deal? And they did, for example. So a travel agent could help you get around. Probably if you call the call center, they're probably going to not have some of that flexibility. So Bill, in terms of travel agents, I'm not sure where you booked, but again, if you were here earlier, I'm going to leave a link to an article with travel agents I suggest by country. I've got UK, travel agent Sarah, US, Canada, Australia. So hopefully that will help. But definitely they can help and jump on. Of course, you can ask them to. There's something you're waiting for, looking for. They can do that. Now, Viking in different countries were working through agents. If you're in the US, they were working through agents. In the UK, they stopped sort of working with agents, or lots of agents. They're back working with agents again. So that's also very helpful. Let's have a look. I probably need to speed up to make sure I'm getting through even more questions that I'm getting through. So let me just make sure I get myself lined up here before I do fruit bat travel, which sounds great. So let's have a look. So I just want to make sure that I answered your question. I jump back in the next. Mediterranean or Caribbean, I want to do the Med, but fear that you don't have enough time in the ports to really appreciate the city, i.e. Athens. I mean, again, a lot of it hinges around what you're looking for. If you're looking for immersion, culture, etc., etc. The Mediterranean is fantastic because in a short space of time you can see a lot. Now, actually, ironically, to your question, I've actually just done a video which is being edited. It won't be out probably for about 3 weeks now around the Mediterranean, and pointing out there are 3 key itineraries. There's the Western Mediterranean, you've got the Eastern Mediterranean, and the Adriatic. Personally, if you've never been to the Mediterranean, I would strongly recommend the Western Caribbean, which will not include Athens, but that's going to take you to see Spain, so things like Barcelona, France, you might see Marseille, Nice, Monte Carlo, you might go to Saint-Tropez depending on the ship. Italy, you might go to La Spezia or Livorno, so you can get to see Pisa and Florence. Civitavecchia, you can see Rome, you might go to Naples, you might go to Parma, etc. That is going to get you to see some of the most iconic places in the world. Now, you're absolutely right. The risk is that you might just be there for 8 hours a day, but generally speaking, what you'll find in those places is they will offer you 8 to 10 hour excursions. So you will get a chance to immerse, and the ships will often depart late. Of course, the other thing you could do is go for a longer trip. The other thing that I do talk about that in Freeback Travel is you'll find a lot of those, for example, the Sun Princess one I did, it started in Barcelona and in Naples. But what people hadn't done is they hadn't done a pre-stay in Barcelona, and they didn't do a post-stay in Naples to actually see those ports. So playing around with that is quite important. To me, the Caribbean, but maybe look at it as more about sunshine, relaxation, beaches kind of stuff. But if you are concerned about spending more time, do take a look at Azamara. Azamara's pitch is that they spend more overnights than any other cruise line. But you'll find if you dive into some of the itineraries, a lot of lines will stay overnight. So they might stay overnight in Livorno, so people can go to both Pisa and Florence. So they're sort of starting to do some of that as well. So that's some thoughts. But as that video is coming out in a short while, a couple of weeks. Not really a short while at all, is it? Jay, one of my favorite topics, of course. If you could only do one Panama cruise in your life, which month, which cruise line, duration, embarking? So Jay, in reality, so we're talking about a full transit would be the first thing I would say. So full transit is key. So straight away, if you're doing a full transit, you're talking around at least a 10-day, if not a 2-week cruise. So you can do a 10-day, which will often say start in Panama and end up in Miami, or Miami and end up in Panama City. And Panama City is actually a great place to go. So that's one of your shortest options for the full transit. But most will tend to go Miami to, say, San Diego, Los Angeles, and kind of do that. So that tends to be a 2-week. Now, in reality, you are a little bit more limited when you can go Panama Canal cruise. So if you want to do the full transit, most of them will tend to go sort of the beginning of, they'll either go when ships are repositioning, so they'll either go when they're coming back from Alaska around about October time, or when they're heading to Alaska around about sort of March, April time. And then some will go at other periods. So that's why, for example, my group cruise that I'm doing through the Panama Canal is actually at the end of January, because the ship is heading there. It's doing some actually West Coast stuff and then ultimately heading back, for example. So I would first of all, so I would tend to focus around, I mean, I've done them sort of that January, February, March time. I really like that. It's not quite rainy season, so it's less rainy. I can't remember the rain, but it's never been that rainy. We've had a little shower, so you know, it's very hot and you're outside, it's very sticky, but it's not raining, so you actually can just be out on the deck, much easier to see. Cruise line is quite important. I think actually the size of ship, Jay, is even more important than cruise line. You want to make sure you're on a ship that's Panamax, so it's small enough to get through. So for example, Queen Mary 2 is not Panamax. It has to go through the new locks. You want to get on something smaller, so Vista class or smaller ships. The other thing I would say is you want to go on a ship where you can really see it from the front. So for example, I have been on Queen Elizabeth, Queen Victoria, which is a Vista class ship. You could get right on the bow of the ship. I've been through on the Zedadam, which is what I'm doing a group cruise on. Again, it's a Vista class ship. You get right on the bow. But I've also done it on Marina, where you couldn't see the front at all through outside at all, unless you had a cabin on the front. And then we also did it on Regent Grandeur at Christmas time, which is also a great time to do it, by the way. But but I did a little bit more in January. We did literally just before Christmas. And again, you could only see the front through glass. So you really want a ship that's going to get you right on the bow of the ship, because you can then look at going through the locks right up firsthand. It's just fantastic. So I would tend to look, at Vista class ships. So Honda America have Vista class ships, Cunard have Vista class ships. I personally would also go from the Caribbean side to the Panama side, because you hit the Gatton locks first, which are the first 3 locks, and they are kind of the iconic locks, the most dramatic locks. Not that others aren't dramatic, but they 3 together. Once you get to the Pedro Miguel and the Miraflores locks at the other side, they are split. So you go through the Pedro Miguel down 1 level, sail a bit, then you go down through the Miraflores. So that's what I would do. So, but if your chance is to, so if you want a shorter thing, do a Miami. So you could do, if you do Oceania now, they used to do it on, unfortunately the ship they used to do it on, they did it on Serena. I was booked on Serena, but they upgraded to the Marina at the time. But they're getting rid of those smaller R-class ships. But there are some that will go from Miami just to Panama City. Let's have a look. Helena, hopefully the question I answered a little bit earlier on Norway will help. So you're heading on Apex to Norway, the Arctic Circle. Recommendations for Tromsø. So to be honest with you, Helena, in Tromsø, I just self-explored in Tromsø. I've only been there once, and I just self-explored because we'd done lots of other things. So I don't have any specific recommendations. If anyone does, pop those in there. Helena, the other thing I would suggest is take a look at what'sinport.com and see what they recommend on Tromsø. They're really good at suggesting kind of key things. So let's have a look. Oh, Randy, good to see you here. You're getting back on Grandeur. So we met Randy and his lovely wife when we were on that Christmas cruise I was talking about, the Panama. So they're going back on Grandeur around Ireland this summer. Any can't miss spots we should be sure to hit. So in terms of Ireland, one of the things, I don't know if you're going round Ireland, I guess you're doing both Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland. In Belfast, go to the Titanic Museum, which is really interesting, fascinating. In Dublin, if you haven't been, even the Guinness brewery thing is really interesting. Those were my top tips. If anyone has better suggestions, I don't know if those are the most interesting, but definitely those are my kind of top tips. Probably not very helpful, Randy. Have a fabulous time back on the Grandeur. Sarah asking the question, why do cruises seem the only type of holiday where other people find totally acceptable to rig their noses? They can't imagine anything worse. I think it's interesting, to your point, is I mean, obviously I have this all the time. Everybody I meet, and they know that I go cruising a lot, but I've had it even with my own family. So my sister-in-law was very much of that. Why on earth do you go cruising? Sounds absolutely awful. It took me 20 years to go on a cruise. I've told the story before. Once her husband became a little bit more nervous about traveling post-COVID, more just for kind of health and other kind of reasons, decided they still wanted to experience more, and I got them to go on a cruise, and they absolutely loved it, and they got over that. Can't imagine anything worse. They've been on gazillions of cruises. They've booked like massive big cruises to Asia now, and so on. So it's because people, it has a reputation of being for old people, fuddy-duddy, like trapped, all the kind of stereotypes. I think that is why, I think that is why. And the thing is, I always say to people, like, I promise you, if I get you on the right cruise ship for you, you will hate me, because you will be absolutely addicted, and that's all you want to do. And I do think that's absolutely true. I haven't met anybody that's been on the right cruise line that hasn't become addicted. I'm sure there are people that just say it's not for them. Just Francis, do you save a substantial amount on a new booking when you book at the services desk on the ship? We're selling Seabourn's Encore, 19 Nautica. You will not save a substantial amount. What you'll normally get, just Francis, is, and I can't remember, I think it's 5% or extra onboard credit. You'll get some better bits and pieces. So once you've been on seaborne once, you automatically get some discount anyway, and then often there might be a slightly different discount on top of that, and you might get some onboard credit. So you will definitely get a sweetener. Now, I can't remember exactly the ins and outs of seaborne. One of the attractive things, particularly for me coming from the UK, is normally when we book a cruise, you pay the deposit and it's locked in, it's non-refundable. Sometimes when you book through that system, they do allow you to change a cruise once or twice. So that's appealing. Now, in the US, if you're in the US, flexible or movable deposit options is more of a thing. So you will get some discount, but you might find that actually, particularly with Antarctica, you might find waiting for promotions and activities is better. Now, the key thing with Antarctica is planning very far ahead, but you could look for when they're doing promotions on Antarctica. You may get a deeper deal. Now, one of the things you could look at, which I'm pretty sure they do, is obviously go and see what deals they can get you. But some cruise lines, and I think Seabourn do this, they sometimes allow you to buy a certificate on board, which you can then sort of use. You have to use it within a certain time, which still locks in some of those perks. Now, just check with them if there's another promotion. You can do a promotion on top of a promotion, because that's not always possible. So you will get some discount, but it's not going to be massive. They're not going to give you like 15% off or 20% off or something like that, unfortunately. Highland Cottage books. I'm traveling on Queen Mary 2 in December, and I want to record a brief out of the library for my channel. When would be a good time of experience to do that when it's empty? Don't want to be rude. One of the things I would actually probably ask the librarian if you can do something one day before they're opened or when they're closed. Would be what I would suggest. Because they, I'm sure they don't get asked that often, and I'm sure if you ask very nicely, they might be miserable and not want to do it. But if it's not a lot of time, but be a time when they're still closing up, when you can go in and where they've still got admin, so you're not cutting into their downtime, because obviously they work very long hours. But I would ask them if that's an option. But generally speaking, on those transatlantics, the library is pretty busy all the time. And it depends how long that you want to do. So sometimes, probably, in their first thing and at the beginning and a closing time is probably going to be your best options, because people are going to be heading out. The other time to check, I would say, is lunchtime. Is sometimes a good time. Now, I'm trying to remember that they close. There's no one that really. I'm trying to think in the evening meal. There's never really an overlap for that. Best bet would be to ask. Sometimes I haven't actually asked that, but sometimes they are pretty they're pretty friendly, and particularly if you've got a bookshop, talk about books and selling books, and you're going to build a good connection there. Let's have a look. Thomas Dean's Fine Art. We're going Silver Sea for a Mediterranean cruise with another couple in their 80s, but mobile. They're keen to Sir Herculean, which advise Silver Sea's tour attempting to find a private. So I'm guessing maybe I'm thinking maybe you're saying maybe less mobile, or fairly mobile, or limited mobile. I'm guessing that's why you're asking the question. Now, Herculaneum, for what I remember, I've only been there once. I seem to remember it is pretty up and down and climbing around. So I guess that would be the first thing to check, that you're comfortable. I would try and stick with if you can, because I don't know if it's one of their included excursions. So obviously, if it's an included excursion, they will give a ranking within their online. If you go into your My Silver Sea and look at the tours, they normally give rankings about the degree of mobility, how they're ranking it in terms of what their excursions are offering. So I would check their mobility ranking there first. And if you think that is too challenging, what you could do is ask them, because they do that option now. It's quite a costly option, but they do an option where they will have a driver and stuff, and you could brief them specifically on them having somebody that can deal with a mobility one, if you want to keep it within the Silver Sea world. Because if you go to those I was mentioning, I don't know if you were here earlier, when I was mentioning like Viator, Shore Excursions Group, and Venture Shore, they tend not to offer mobility ones, so it's going to be more challenging to find one. So what I would do is, if you decide the Silver Sea ones are acceptable, the private driver, there's 4 of you, it might not be too crazy expensive, but again, stress with Silver Sea needs to be someone who can deal with mobility issues. assuming that's the issue. But the other thing to do, which I do find normally quite helpful, is I would go into, there's a very active Silversea group on Facebook, which is called Silversea Passengers, very active. Now you can often, and they're building a thing on there which is port tips and advice. So they do have a section on there, but you also have the ability to ask a question to say, look, exactly this. Has anyone got experience of people with limited mobility doing a tour, going to Herculaneum out of Naples? Any suggestions? You might find someone has a particular tour guide or someone that they've used there. Because they may already have that in. I haven't actually looked at the port in detail at their port suggestions, but they're trying to build more of a library of this kind of stuff on Silversea. But if you aren't a Silversea Passengers group member, it's worth. They have a lot of resources in there, a lot of resources in there. A couple of people saying they can't wait for the Panama group cruise, which is fantastic. Right, so let's have a look. Thinking about a Hawaiian cruise. Who do you think is the best line? Is there a specific itinerary excursion you recommend? Well, in reality, I wrestle with this. I have been to only 2 ports in Hawaii as part of it when I was doing part of a bigger trip on Queen Victoria, and I do really want to go and do more of Hawaiian. Now, the one which is worth looking at, but may not be for everybody, which is the Pride of America. Now they're just revamping the ship, but it's the only ship that's allowed to sail within, basically staying within the US, because they have to have, the ship was defined as being built in the US, so that wasn't fully built in the US, and it has US crew, which allows them under the Passenger Vessels Act to sell this. So they have the most intensive itinerary. The advantage, you don't have all those sea days. Now, it's not for everybody, so take a look at that. That is probably the best itinerary of all. The ones I've looked at is I've looked at Princess. And Holland America, they do quite regular trips out of the West Coast. But the problem is you kind of have long trips. You have like 5 or 6 sea days to get there, 4 or so ports, maybe 5 ports, and 6 sea days come back. So it's quite a lot of use of time. You'll see other ones coming like Oceania, Seabourn. They're often coming up from Papeete, do some Hawaii across the West Coast as well. So you could tag onto those. But I would take a look as a starting point at the Pride of America. Now, I haven't been on it, so I'm basically sort of telling you what I've been working through there. Christine, generally when do cruises 2027 open booking? Christine, it varies a lot by cruise line is what I'm seeing. So some are already selling 2027, others are releasing them later. What I tend to see generally, certainly it used to be the case, that you'd often see it sort of in the last quarter, they would open up. So they've opened up now sort of the first part of into 2027. A lot of them launched their world cruises, and then they launched them a little bit later, but some lines already have. That's a good question, of course, to ask the travel agents as well, although I don't think you work with travel agents so much, but tends to be a little bit sort of towards that quarter. Often, sometimes, if you look around, sort of once you get into Black Friday, Cyber Monday, because they tag launch of itineraries around that time. We've been watching Rod Stewart. So I actually was watching Whip's Travel talking about, because Rod, for those in Glastonbury, which is the massive big music festival, is on, and Rod Stewart is this year playing the Legend slot, which is from 3:45 for an hour and a half. I watched the beginning bit of it actually before this, to be honest, and I'm going to catch up the rest of it later. So yes, so Whip's Travel I met on the Sky Princess group cruise. So it was great to meet. Right, we're wrapping around out of time, so let's see if I can quickly get a couple of questions before we wrap. Richard, we are a bit disillusioned with Princess. Next cruise would be either Holland America with Glacier Bay or Viking with Glacier Bay. Your thoughts? Richard, if you want a more adult experience, I would definitely look at Viking. Now, Viking theoretically should have some Glacier Bays, because they do actually, on the most recent listing, although I haven't looked at their itineraries, because you're right, on the Viking ones that I've been on, that haven't had Glacier Bay, but on the listings from the Glacier Bay National Park site, where they list the lines that have access, which is only 7 of them, Viking was listed as one of those, but I haven't seen itineraries. But anyway, if you want an adult experience, I would absolutely go Viking. They do go, particularly if you did the one I did, which is between Seward and Vancouver. They go to Hubbard Glacier, which is fantastic as an option. So that is also fairly iconic one to go. If you go on Holland America are fantastic, but bear in mind you will have a lot of kids on board because unless you go really early, even major, but you still have quite a lot of kids. But if you go in the peak July, August, into early September, there'll be a lot of families on board. So it depends a little bit on that experience that you want. So if you don't mind the ship being very full, very busy, lots of kids, because Glacier Bay is really important. That's just a factor to kind of bear in mind. So let's do one more quick question, and I do need to wrap up. Do you have a recommendation for a 15 to 20-day Australia, New Zealand luxury cruise in 2026? Not interested in other countries. So I have been looking at this because I really want to do a circumnavigation. I would take a look. Viking have some very good itineraries in Australia and New Zealand. So definitely look at them. Oceania with the Riviera has some fantastic itineraries. And Seabourn, although that's into 2027, Seabourn have some great itineraries. They're doing their world cruise, but it's 2027, are focusing on like South Pacific, Hawaii, Australia, New Zealand kind of stuff. And they've got a great leg on there, but that's 2027. But take a look at Viking. They have great ones. Do take a look at Seabourn because they do have some as well, and look at Oceania especially. Now I know Crystal do head down that way as well, but I haven't looked at their itineraries. But those are the ones that I would definitely take a look at. Shall I do one quick personal one, and then I'll wrap. How do you stay so slim when you cruise so much? Because I'm obsessed with it. So I've always been. I do a lot of exercise. So if you're here earlier, I mentioned Mark and I did a 15-mile cycle this morning. I do Peloton. I'm obsessed with Peloton. I do 2 days of Peloton, 1 day off. So I do Pelotons. And when I'm on a cruise, I use my Peloton app. They don't have Peloton bikes. I do active excursions. I actually am quite disciplined. Now the advantage, because I go cruising quite a lot, fortunately, I do able to regulate much more. So for example, I don't really many desserts. I do active excursions. I then drink alcohol, so that helps, I guess, a lot. So I'm not drinking a lot of cocktails and things. Always use the stairs, which is why I like going on small ships. Less stairs to be walking up and down. Like when I was on Sun Princesses, oh my goodness, I thought, well, I am burning a lot of calories going up and down these stairs. So I do tend to be quite disciplined with what I eat. So I eat quite a lot of fish and salads and that sort of stuff. So I do kind of sort of calorie control, do a lot of exercise, and I do that also at home. So that's also kind of what I do. So I often, when I go on a cruise, I came back from Sun Princess, came back from Sky Princess, basically the same weight, came back from Sun Princess, maybe 1 pound on. So it sort of works. It's that kind of thing. But when going cruising less frequently, it's much more of a challenge because obviously you want to try things. So I found, for example, when I went on a more vacation on Grandeur, which I was talking about earlier, I met Randy and his wife on. I was there with Mark, and it was more of a vacation. That was more challenging because I was probably doing less exercise and eating way more. So I've run out of questions, I'm afraid. So sorry, that's run out of time, I'm afraid. I will be back next week, so hopefully we'll get to answer loads more questions. I always have a look at the questions, try and touch on any of those that I possibly can. Thanks so much for joining me. It's boiling hot here. I hope if it's boiling hot there that you're staying cool. Have a great rest of the weekend. Thanks so much for all the great questions. Take care and see you next week, hopefully.